Hello everyone, welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. I'm Gabriela Kovac from Hungary. I'm co-founder of the International Language Coaching Association, and I'm going to be talking about language coaching and how it can impact on your classes, your routine using books and written material. So today I'm going to be talking about language coaching to all of you, and it's a very exciting discovery tour I think that we're going to have in this 30 minutes. And we're going to be looking at what you already have intuitively from the coaching approach in the teaching practice that you have. And in this masterclass, we're going to look at what you need to implement, what kind of tweaks and changes you can make to your classes so that you can incorporate more of the coaching mindset in your classes. You know, one of the things that we have is we need to define what language coaching is, right? So that's going to be the first thing that we're going to be looking at. So what language coaching is, we'll look at the definition, how you can apply the different practices so that you're going to increase the autonomy, the motivation, the goal-centeredness of your learners, which is also obviously going to impact on the way that you approach your classes. And what we're going to explore in detail is what specific tweaks you can have in the classroom so that you can be approaching your books in a different way, okay? You know, everyone has their box of tools, and we're going to be looking at how we can upcycle all the things that you have to include the coaching approach. So let's get started and have a look at it. I'm going to start with the definition of language coaching, which was assembled over a period of a year with the Language Coaching Association board members. And this is what we came up with. It's got 3 parts, and I'm going to be highlighting afterwards what I find really important in this definition so that we're on the same page, because it's an emerging discipline. It's something which is new, and we need to understand what it actually is. So language coaching is a learner-led process aimed at creating optimal target language acquisition while working towards effective international communication skills in order to reach future-related goals. 2 more parts here that I'd like us to have a look at so that we understand exactly what the definition actually has, you know, what the framework is. So it's based on strategies utilizing intrinsic motivation and developing awareness where the coaching practice develops and refines learning skills. Both the coach and the learner will share the responsibility for the process and success equally, with the learners taking ownership of their own learning and development. And finally, as a result of this whole process, the learner will have much more control over their whole language learning process and also the target language communication processes, whether it's for general purposes or for workplace purposes. Now, what I'd like to highlight of all this is that it's goal-oriented, it's results-focused as a process. It works with partnership, which means that there's much more shared responsibility between the teacher and the learners. I'm going to be using learners and clients interchangeably. It's the same role in coaching. And finally, it's about giving much more control over to the learners. Their confidence and their motivation is going to grow, and you're going to see the results of that as soon as you start applying the framework of coaching in your classes. Now we're going to move on, and we're going to look a little bit at the learning environment and the reasons why language coaching is so timely. So bear with me now. I've put together 5 aspects of the language learning environment. I'm trying to contextualize language coaching in a way. So what are the trends that are affecting learning today? They are interconnected, so it's very difficult to just say the first 2 are the most important. All of them are equally important, and they impact on each other. So just very briefly, what we've noticed in the past few years is there's much more awareness, there's much more information about social and emotional well-being, why it's important for our learners, why it's important for professionals. So it's a bi-directional thing. Also, the way that we are gathering information, how we process and use data is much more different than what it used to be 20, 30 years ago. There's not so much book dominance. Obviously, there are still books used, obviously, but many more aspects of gathering information, basically via the internet, have, the roles are now changing. Because of these, the way that we work on a daily basis, the way that we study on a daily basis, our whole routine is totally uprooted. It's changed. It's impacting, of course, this whole thing is impacting the way that we are learning, not only outside of class, but also in the classroom itself. The expectations, the needs, and the goals are changing because of this. And of course, the umbrella for this whole change in environment for learning in general, not only language learning, is this online presence, the virtuality of what is going on when we want to read something, when we want to learn about something, when we want to look something up, even just very briefly. We're constantly online, and this is having a major impact, a major influence on how we are approaching our own learning. So this is some of the background. This is why language coaching can support the kind of individual learning paths that our learners are now experiencing inside and outside of class. In order to understand how language coaching works, I'm going to talk about the 4 pillars of language coaching, which once again at ILCA we have assembled. And we're going to be focusing on a crystallized version. Of course, there are a number of aspects of language coaching, but these are the 4 key elements: rapport, awareness, goals, and content. And the question is, what is it that I mean by that? Well, we're going to have a look at that. First of all, rapport. What we want them to understand is that both the teachers and the learners need to be much more open with the kind of communication that they have, so that the collaboration between them, the partnership which I have been talking about, is going to be mutually embraced. One thing which is really important is that we want to create a positive learning environment for our learners, so that this is emphasized through a two-way communication channel. So we want to create partnership, but to create that partnership, we need to be talking both ways equally in partnership in a very democratic environment. And through this, we're also going to be establishing the expert zones. So as a coach, I believe that my learner is fully functioning as an expert in what they actually are learning towards. So connected to their goals and also everything around that. We also want to be providing this very positive, very trusting environment in which this collaboration can take place. More about positivity a little bit later on. Now, in terms of awareness, what is really important is that we want the learner to understand that they must come more into a metacognitive sort of understanding of their own language learning journey, which means that the coach is going to be asking more questions, maybe as homework, maybe during the class, so that the learner comes more to grips about what's missing for them, what it is that works for them, what it is that they need. And this all points to a much more structured approach to critical thinking, which is an element which has once again surfaced more and more often lately, being much more critical of the processes that are happening in class and outside, and bringing them into the class and having conversations about them are really important in coaching also. Another aspect which is key is how we approach goals. It's going to be, language learning goals are going to be set together, which does not mean that the client, the learner, receives full control over what they are doing, but it means that they're given more freedom, more opportunity to make decisions for themselves, and this will definitely support their autonomous, their independent learning. And of course, I could go on and on about self-directed learning, etc., but that's not the goal here. And in this way, we're able to create strategies, language learning, time management strategies, whatever other areas from life that might need a bit of strengthening. That's all going to come under goals. These are going to be aspects of the language learning environment for the learner, which we would be focusing on, which the client would want to address and work towards, simply to be better language learner. Okay. And finally, we're going to be looking at content. I've already touched upon this. What is key here is that the learner understands that it's not only the teacher who's going to be bringing in all the input. I remember years and years and years ago when I started out as a teacher, what happened was I was so intent on providing the best materials, bringing in everything, the latest, the newest, and it was an immense burden. It took up a lot of time, space, energy. And what we're seeing now is for teachers who are struggling, either because they've got so many clients or because they don't have enough clients or learners, is that there's too much pressure on them because of this. And what we're doing with coaching is we're sharing the responsibility. We're involving the learner. We want to empower them so that they understand that they can bring in content, they can come up with their own ideas, they can be creative in their language learning process. And because of this, they're going to be able to commit to their best selves. How can language coaching support this? Once again, I've brought 4 aspects, and we're going to be focusing towards the end on how this can impact on your classes. First of all, you're going to be looking at identifying how you can look at the language learning journey and how your learner views these. First of all, you're looking at how you're going to be communicating at the beginning when you start working together, and what you want to be focusing on in the whole journey, so that your learner is going to reach their goals easier, more effectively, with less time and energy input. How can you do that? One very basic way of working in coaching is that you're going to be using a lot of questioning techniques. Once again, due to the brevity of this masterclass, I can't go into details, but we're going to be touching upon questioning techniques here. You want to be asking questions to support your learners, okay? So that's basically one of the key ideas of coaching that we're going to be looking at. Also, we're going to be bringing in visual kinesthetic tools. Tools are the equivalent of, in teaching, you would use exercises, activities. In coaching, you use tools or methodologies which you would be applying in the classroom, okay, the language learning classroom. These are great because once again, they're going to be supporting new insights. Your learners are going to gain more motivation and feel less frustrated when they are faced with challenges. Now, how is this coming into line with what we're going to talk about today? We're going to be looking at a new way, fresh set of eyes when we're looking at the books and the written inputs that we have. On the one hand, we've got the books, we've got the students, and we've got the teacher. And most of the time, the books are what usually control how the lessons put together. Now, in coaching, this framework is going to change, and we're going to look into it, okay, in more detail. Now, the question is, how can you add that coaching into your classrooms? Now, let's explore this, and I'm sure you're going to take away quite a lot of ideas that you can apply in your classrooms. First of all, you're going to want to increase the motivation and engagement, because that's really the drive, the motor of, gaining more energy, reducing the time, the expectations and the needs for the learners. It's going to empower them. It's going to help them to make more decisions. I mean, if you don't trust, if you do not believe in your language learners, then who is going to believe in them? Will they believe in what they actually want to achieve? So we're looking at things from, yes, I want you to be able to, be more engaged. I want you to understand better, to be able to take more control of your language learning. We want them to be much more active, not so passive in classes. And because they're putting so much time, energy, very often money and hard work into the language learning processes, because they want to be successful and achieve their goals, they're going to need that commitment. And if we as language coaches or teachers with a coaching approach cannot push them towards a stronger commitment, all the lessons are going to fall flat after a while. They're going to be, learners who are struggling, who are after a while going to impact even financially what's going on for you, because they're just not going to attend lessons. So it's quite critical that we have that intrinsic motivation. And of course, I need to stress that coaching is not the teaching. Coaching is supporting the learning process, but the teaching is going to actually teach the language. Okay, so just making that very clear once again. So how can you use coaching? You're going to be using questions. You're going to be using various coaching techniques. And if there's one place where you could be using coaching, that's definitely going to be at the start, when you meet for the first time, when you have your first lesson with your learners. So it might seem a bit like a slow start that you're using a lot of coaching questions and coaching tools, but actually you're going to save time definitely in the long run. Now, I mentioned that we're going to be looking at communication focus for how you can be communicating in the classes. Now, once again, this is based on Martin Seligman's Positive Psychology Center and all the research and the expertise that has gone into it. And they've come up with 3 pillars which help coaches identify with the coaching mindset in their communication. And that is moving from a negative focus to a positive focus. Now, that does not mean a happy-go-lucky kind of approach to everything, but it does mean that we're not going to be looking at the mistakes, but we're going to be looking at what works well and what can be made even better. What else? We're not going to be focusing on problems, on what it is that is really, really difficult, and what it is that they cannot handle, and the challenges, but we're going to be looking at what the solution is, what the expectations, what the goals are, and what we need to be able to achieve those. Once again, we're not focusing on the past. After all, we're not into psychology. As psychologists, this is not therapy, so we have to be very careful about these boundaries, and we're not going to be analyzing past learning experiences. What we are going to be looking at is embracing and acknowledging what has happened in the language learning history of the client, of the learner, and looking at what it is that they can focus on, they can achieve, and how they can reach those goals. That's where the coach is going to be supporting the learner. So this is how you can be applying these in practice, just keeping these in mind. Instead of the negative, instead of the problem, instead of the past, you're going to be looking at more of the positive, more of solutions, and present and future focus. Okay, so moving from the sad face to the smiling face. Now, what we're also going to be looking at is how we can create that sense of achievement for your learners, what it is that's going to truly empower them, so that that boulder in the picture doesn't look so impossible to lift, but actually something that over time can be achieved. What we're looking at, we want the learner to feel empowered because they have more control over the content that they're bringing into class. They're going to feel that they are receiving more positive encouragement, which is going to stimulate them. So it's just a very easy thing. Record yourself one lesson and have a look at how many positive encouragements you're giving your learners, and also check how many negative statements you have, and you're going to see what kind of balance you have, what that ratio is. Also, encourage more peer-led activities for your learners. They're really going to thrive on it. I usually get my learners to share and embrace the diversity in every sense of the word that they bring into great classrooms, and it works wonders. One very simple tool that you can bring into the classroom is scaling. It's a coaching tool which is, it has a very simple application. you ask your learners, for example, if we're looking about this empowerment, okay, as a topic, how much control do you have over content in the classes? And whether we like it or not, very often they're going to say something between 2 and 5. If 1 is absolutely none and 10 is I've got full control. And the coaching starts when you add another question and say, well, what do you think is missing? What do you need to move up a notch? So if your answer is 2, what do you think would happen on a number 3 on that scale? And the learner starts thinking about what ways there are for them to start getting more involved in content. So that's just an example of how you could be using scaling. My question here to you is what you can do differently already so that you can increase empowerment for your learners. You know, perspective really is everything. Very often, as professionals, we understand the profession that we are working in from a certain kind of lens. We have our glasses on, like me, and what you see is that your learners also have their own perspective, and it's very difficult to connect. You can see a learner here probably watching their teacher on Zoom, and that's a great way to be moving forward. So the teacher and the student there on the screen. Very often, however, the teacher is seeing something completely different. And it's simply because the teacher has a different perspective. In this picture, we expect from the student's point of view that the teacher also sees the same thing, but very often the teacher sees something completely different. And what coaching can do is help the learner and the teacher to embrace where the differences are and how they can move forward so that the learner is actually achieving their own goals. Now we're going to be looking at what is in the coaching toolbox and what tools you can take away from today so that you can actually start working with your learners. Now this is an activity that I used with one specific learner, and then I have been using over and over again. And I'll explain very briefly. I asked the learner to collect their own language learning strengths. And it took a few minutes. I asked her a few questions. I came up with 1 or 2 tips and ideas, which, you know, started stimulating her own thoughts and ideas. And in the end, she came up with this list of being very accurate, having good reading skills, emailing a lot, and using varied vocabulary. Now, for me as a professional, this is about, you know, passive skills and needing to spend a lot of time to reach good results. That I think you've got a pretty good picture of what kind of learner this is. I then asked my learner to identify what weaknesses she has, which you can see on the right hand. And she came up with, I think there's no surprise here, she came up with the active skills, which are more of a challenge for her. So the fact that it's difficult to improvise, her pronunciation seems weak for her anyway, and she doesn't really have too much opportunity to speak, and when she's talking, it's very difficult to focus on the grammar. So I asked her to first of all reflect on what she sees here, and she says, well, she's got more weaknesses than strengths. And I said, yeah, okay, what would happen if all of these came under an umbrella term of ideal strengths? And she said, well, that's not really possible, because one thing that I've got strengths, yes, I see that, but the others are weaknesses. And I said, well, just try to imagine what would happen if those weaknesses became strengths. And she said, well, you know, one thing that I've just realized as we were talking about this is that my strengths are strengths because I'm actually paying a lot of attention to them and I'm practicing them a lot. And on the other hand, my weaknesses are weaknesses because I'm not really doing too much about them. So they could become strengths if I focused more on them. And I think there's one thing here which is really important, that I should find more occasions to speak. And then we had a fantastic conversation, a really empowering conversation for the learner to try and put together a very short action plan for how she could move forward to get more pronunciation, speaking practice, more opportunities to improvise. And then that was what we were working on when I was working with her as a teacher. So this was the coaching bit, and then there was the teaching. Another thing that you could be looking at is a bidirectional model, which is called the 5S model, once again assembled by Ilka. We're looking at the strategy, skills, support, self-assurance, and success of the learner. And the way that you can use this tool is that you ask your learner questions, coaching questions about these. You can ask your learner or learners, you can work in pairs or groups so that the learners feel comfortable. And you can get them to think about what strategies they have or need to be more successful language learners, what skills they have, what they need, who, where, how can support them to be more successful, what confidence issues they have, how do they see their confidence. You could do a bit of scaling here on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident do you feel? And then could they please define what success means for them as language learners? And you'll come up with lots and lots of answers and ideas. And the same can also apply for you as a professional. So you can ask yourself these same questions to reflect a little bit on your profession. What strategies am I using to make my learners more successful? What skills do I need to perhaps, upgrade? Where can I get support so that I can move forward? How confident am I in my teaching skills, in my coaching skills, wherever you are on the journey? And how successful do I feel as a language professional? The good thing about this model is that if you take it into class, you can have a great conversation with your learners so that they're really going to understand a bit more depth about their language learning journey, and they're going to feel much more, if learners are sharing these ideas, they're really opening up and they're bearing their souls a little bit, to say some big words here. And they're going to understand that everyone has a unique approach to learning, and that's fine. Everyone has to find the one which is ideal for them so that they can reach their goals. Now, how can you ask questions with a coaching approach? I guess that's on your mind because I have been talking about the fact that in coaching you need to be using questions a lot. What we're going to do is we're going to have a look at a textbook page. This is a typical textbook. If you just have a quick glance, the format, the colors, the pictures, the kind of activities are very, very widespread. So you've probably met this sort of thing. Now, as a language teacher, what is it that you would do with this page? How would you teach it in class? Things that would come to your mind would be things like, okay, checking the time. How much time do I have for this page? What kind of new vocabulary is there here for my group or for my individual learner? What kind of warmer should I bring into the class for this? How do I check that the topic is familiar for them? What kind of comprehension checks should I put together? What's the ratio of the 4 skills? Is there anything that needs extra attention? Do I have my CD ready, etc.? So these are the kind of very teacherly things that when we want to put together a lesson plan, this is how we're going to go through it, and a lot of other things. Now, a language coach is definitely going to look at it from a completely different point of view, and these are the kind of things that they would ask the language learner, okay? Things like, can you find top preference exercises? Or how would you prioritize the questions, the exercises, sorry. Can you explain why certain activities are on this page? Would you make a distinction between classroom activities, homework activities? Also, could you identify what the focus of this whole page is? So we're getting them to think about what is on the page, why it's on the page, what kind of order it's in, what their own personal preferences are. Now, obviously, as a coach, you wouldn't go through these and kind of, check the boxes. But you would ask 1 or 2 of these questions before you actually start focusing on the teaching itself. So it's a good way to get your learners more involved, and you're giving them a bit of control about, how they like to start working. What is it that they'd like to focus on? You can even give it for voting, and then get them more involved and more excited and more motivated to start working on the page itself. Now, what other questions can you ask when you're working with some sort of written format? Okay, so any kind of book or handout. It can also work on the screen, of course. For example, which exercise seems interesting or exciting? How would you start to do the activity or exercise? What would you do now if you were the teacher? Now, this doesn't mean that we're giving full control to the learner, but we're asking them to do is once again to change perspective. And it's, trust me, they come up with brilliant ideas. What challenges do you see at this point? We're not pushing away difficulties, but we want to embrace them once again with a different mindset, being more open to the ideas that our learners have about what's going on for them. How can this exercise be useful for you? Maybe there's low interest because they don't really see the relevance of that activity. But if one or two of them can open up about it, the others are going to also join in. So it can be a very fruitful kind of question. Have you tried this sort of exercise before? Maybe there's some uncertainty because it's a completely new activity. Who would you gladly collaborate with? That's also something that you could ask so that they can make that decision of, well, I've been working with Johnny so far, I'd now like to work with someone else, or I'm totally okay working with him, that sort of thing. What could homework be ideally after today's exercises? Let them decide what they would like to do for homework. It doesn't necessarily have to be coming from the teacher. If, of course, once again, from a professional point of view, the ideas that they come up with are totally okay and acceptable, then why not? So the question is, where can all this lead us? I've put together 4 milestones here that we can have a look at, which are going to show you what it means to embrace a coaching mindset. The first one is building trust, which is the basic element of any kind of coaching process. If there's no trust, then there's not much that you can be talking about. There has to be quite a lot of trust, a lot of, in a way, intimacy in the way that you're approaching the sharing, the understanding, caring about what your learner thinks, how they understand the perspectives that they have and what they're bringing into the process. The second milestone is letting go of the wheel, which means, of course, that you're not giving all the control over to the learners, but you are giving them a much bigger share of contribution to the way that the coaching process, the learning process can work out for them. This also means that you're going to be sharing ideas, coming up with things together. So it's building a mutual bond in which you as the professional are guiding, supporting the learner on their journey. And it doesn't really matter whether it's individual or group, because this sort of magic can happen in any kind of space, but you have to let go and you have to embrace the fact that the questions that you are asking will not have an answer all the time. Especially you don't know the answers to them. And this comes to the last milestone, which is asking those questions. So being very open, very direct, and very frank with, asking questions which you really do not have the answers to. And that takes a lot of courage. So those are the 4 milestones. And I think these can lead us to impacting our classes at a completely different level. And hopefully you're going to be able to enjoy the fruits of this journey. Very briefly, I just do a quick recap of what you have learned today. First of all, that the time is really ripe because of the various influences that are impacting the language learning environment inside and outside class. Coaching is very timely again. The other thing that you want to focus on is to listen more, to observe more, to ask, and then to keep asking them. Bring and fire those coaching questions. Also, you want to be exploring issues around the learning. So you want to find out more about how your learner is experiencing the learning that they have. What is it that's missing? How they see their expectations, their successes, etc. And also, you're going to be able to use coaching tools and techniques which are going to increase the motivation, the clarity, the awareness, you know, just the need to learn is going to be crystallized, and there are going to be specific steps in place for your learner, and they're going to be able to achieve those steps and move forward with much more clarity, saving time and energy. And finally, you want to be building partnership-based collaborations so that your learners are going to understand more and more about how they can work together with you instead of working for you. And there's a huge, big difference there. And if you want to check out, find some more materials for ELT resources, then check out the Gallery Teachers website, where you're going to see much more materials for CPD and professional development. Definitely have a look. I'd say that there are more language learning situations which can benefit from this, particularly language learners who are in situations where they feel particularly stressed or demotivated to be continuing their learning or starting again. They have no particular goals, or they're feeling completely lost on their language learning journey. Also, on the other hand, when the teacher feels that teaching has become quite a big burden, that's when language coaching can actually de-burden them, and give them much more support, and also in turn for their learners. Language coaching can support you ideally when you're starting to work with a learner or a group. Also, you can be applying the reflective part of coaching, so that when you're reflecting after a course on what has happened. And it's also possible to do some language coaching midterm, so that when you want to see what has been covered and what expectations and needs still need to be identified and worked on. Language coaching can help when you want to be focusing more on pulling your learners and getting them involved and engaged and empowering them, instead of pushing all the content towards them, pushing all your ideas towards your learners. You want your learners to regain the space that so far in the teaching arena you have been dominating in a way. You also want to be more asking, much more asking questions than telling and giving answers. And you want to be partnering them instead of creating a hierarchy. So in a nutshell, that's the answer to that question. As a practicing language coach, I've been supporting individual clients and groups in organizations for a number of years. And my experience says that the feedback that I get and the reflections from language learners are very rewarding, and they're saving time and energy for themselves and also for the teachers who are working with them. In organizations, I regularly run initial coaching programs before language courses, and that's something which is really popular and gets the motivation levels much higher up, so that the learners are fired up and really, really want to start working on their language learning. So that's the kind of one of the case studies that I'd highlight here at this point.